We'll walk hand in hand today.
At the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, we had the great pleasure last spring of having our guest speaker today present and perform for us. It was a very small venue, just a little boardroom, and I see many of our UU members here today who were at that presentation. And we were so taken by it and so enamored of it that I brought the idea to the Creative Retirement Group that we ought to consider bringing Randy in to give a presentation for you folks. Very busy lady. She has a concert happening tonight at Grinnell, and it's going to, I think, include a lot of different kinds of performances that she's putting together. Some others will be there along with her, and she may want to talk more about that during her presentation. She is presently employed at the Grinnell College. She's a media specialist there. In fact, that's what brought her to Iowa. In 2005, she came to Grinnell for that position. She hails originally from Greensboro, North Carolina. She did her bachelor's degree in music at Greensboro at Bennett College, and also received a master's in vocal performance from Florida State University in Tallahassee. She's presently working on her doctorate at the University of Iowa, so we're talking about a very busy lady here. She's focusing on vocal literature, specializing in solo performances of people who do Negro spirituals, which of course will be a part of her talk today. Very actively involved in something really new and creative. She's putting together a database and a website of spirituals, and there will be a kind of a discography, a name index of people who have been involved in Negro spirituals since about 1916, I think Randy told me. I want to then ask all of you to welcome our very special guest speaker today, Randy Jones.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you. If you hadn't guessed from all of that Bob told you, I'm very involved and very interested in Negro spirituals, and so every opportunity I have to share the things I'm learning about it with others, I certainly appreciate that opportunity. The presentation, as you can see from the screen up there, is the role of the spiritual in the civil rights movement. Let's see. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. What you just heard is a spiritual. Let's see. The joys of technology. Now it's going to move a little faster than I wanted to. Okay, Negro spirituals are songs created by the Africans who were captured and brought to the United States to be sold into slavery. This stolen race was deprived of their languages, families, and cultures, yet their masters could not take away their music. Over the years, these slaves and their descendants adopted Christianity. Whoops, wrong direction. The religion of their masters. They reshaped it into a deeply personal way of dealing with the oppression of their enslavement. Their songs, which were to become known as spirituals, reflected the slaves' need to express their new faith. Spirituals were created extemporaneously and were passed orally from person to person. These folk songs were improvised as suited the singers. There is a record of approximately 6,000 spirituals or sorrow songs. However, the oral tradition of the slaves' ancestors and the prohibition against slaves learning to read and write meant that the actual number of these songs is unknown. Some of the best-known spirituals include Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, No One Knows the Trouble I've Seen, Steal Away, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Go Down Moses, and so many more. The songs were also used to communicate to one another without the knowledge of their masters. This was particularly the case when a slave was planning to escape bondage and to seek freedom via the Underground Railroad. Northern states beginning with Massachusetts in 1783, began outlawing slavery, leading to the ban on importing slaves to the United States in 1809. In the years leading up to the American Civil War, there were slave revolts such as the one by Nat Turner in 1831. And I wanted to mention that one particularly because this one of the spirituals that you might actually be familiar with because you hear it so much. Steal Away actually is one of the few that's attributed to a specific person, and that is Nat Turner. That they used that song as a means to communicate to one another that they were gathering, that the revolt was near at hand. Another song, Go Down Moses, you've probably have heard of as well, is connected with why did I just suddenly lost? Oh my goodness, I cannot believe I just did that. I'll try to come back to that in a moment. Abolitionists, I'm sorry?
I said it happens to all of us.
Abolitionists actively advocated for the cessation of the institution of slavery. They helped slaves escape from captivity using the Underground Railroad. On the other side, however, you had legislative actions and court decisions such as the Fugitive Slave Act and Missouri Compromise in 1850, the Dred Scott decision and Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, that were reflecting a growing animosity between slave and free states. Election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 seemed to be pretty much a deciding point, however, as far as finally ending with the division of the country into with South Carolina and other southern states choosing to secede from the Union. And this is considered to be a primary cause for the Civil War. With the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the conclusion of the American Civil War in 1865, most former slaves distanced themselves from the music of their captivity. The spiritual seemed destined to be relegated to mention in slave narratives and to a handful of historical accounts by whites who were attempting to notate the songs they heard. The performance of spirituals was given a rebirth when a group of students from the newly founded Fisk University of Nashville, Tennessee, began to tour in an effort to raise money for the financially strapped school. The Fisk Jubilee Singers not only carried spirituals to parts of the United States that had previously never heard of Negro folk songs. The musically trained chorus performed before royalty during their tours of Europe in the 1870s. In 1916, H.T. Burley published the song Deep River for voice and piano. By that point in his career, he had written a few vocal and instrumental works based on the plantation melodies he had learned as a child. However, the setting of Deep River is considered to be the first work of its kind to be written in art song form, specifically for performance by a trained singer. While Burley, Hall Johnson, and their contemporaries were actively composing art, song, and choral settings for spirituals, it was not until the 1930s that a concerted effort was made to preserve this part of American culture in its original form. Following the lead of Fisk University, Southern University, and Prairie View State College, the Federal Writers Project, or the FWP, of the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, worked with various state programs to record the firsthand recollections of the survivors of slavery. These slave narratives included stories about the role of music in their lives and songs delivered by those who had sung these folk songs in that bygone era. Over the years, the spiritual has given birth to a number of other American styles, including blues, jazz, and gospel. Resentment by white Southerners of the efforts to end their particular institution led to creation of groups like the Ku Klux Klan and institution of Jim Crow laws designed specifically to limit access to blacks. Various individual events focused attention to the treatment of blacks: the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in 1925, Marian Anderson's performing at the Lincoln Memorial in 1939, and Jackie Robinson integrating baseball in 1947. And then, of course, we have what we consider, I guess what some consider then, the true beginning of the civil rights movement was the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, which declared the separate but equal education was unconstitutional. Bus boycotts, sit-ins, marches began, bringing together supporters from the North and South and calling forth leaders from the black community, especially from its churches and schools. I want to stop in my presentation just a little bit to ask a question. And I found that this has actually happened more often than I had thought it was going to. Have any of you actually been involved in the marches that took place in the South? Actually had a chance to, actually went down and participated? Okay, well, yes?
Not in the large marches, but I was at the University of Florida during that time, and there were campus marches and protests and so forth that I was certainly involved in.
Okay, so I'm bringing back old times, I hope. So I hopefully will be bringing back a few old times then, perhaps, for you. And, of course, if you have any comments that you want to add, please do share them. One of the concerns that was quickly realized as people were coming down to participate in the marches was that you had had people coming together who really, from the North down to the South, who really had no understanding or real sense of the culture in that part of the country. And, you know, they really wanted to try to find a way to bring these groups together and to make them a cohesive whole, and to, you know, to make sure that everybody was feeling a part of the protest, of the marches that were taking place. And so Martin Luther King was actually believed to be the person who got the idea of using familiar sacred songs for material for protest during the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955-56. They started by using the song "Give Me That Old Time Religion" to reflect nature of struggle and determination to move on to victory. So as you can see, basically what they did was they took the words, the music, and said, instead of singing, "Give me that old time religion, give me that old time religion, give me that old time religion, it's good enough for me," they changed the words to fit the mood, what was going on at that moment, which was something that was very much a part of the spiritual. These were how those songs were created. Something would happen during the day, and they would gather and they would sing. And the songs would become, when I said they were created extemporaneously, I really meant they literally were there in their camp meetings, and these songs would just come naturally to them. And, they would take the song, they would, some melody that they wanted to sing with some words they might have heard or apply for that particular moment, and they would actually take those songs and teach them to one another. So in this case, what they would do is they found words that would fit. And you know what? Now, you have been sitting there, and I hope you had a wonderful lunch, but you're about to work. So I actually want you to put these words up here for a reason. You're going to actually sing them with me. So you have somebody who might start out, just so you have a sense of where it's going. We are all right, I'm going to jot this down a little bit because I do know that everybody has had a good lunch, and you might need to jot it down just a hair. We are moving on to victory. We are moving on to victory. We are moving on to victory with hope and dignity. We shall all stand together. We shall all stand together. We shall all stand together till everyone is free. We know love is the watchword. We know love is the watchword. We know love is the watchword for peace and liberty. Black and white, all are brothers. Black and white, all are brothers. Black and white, all are brothers. To live in harmony. We are moving on to victory. We are moving on to victory. We are moving on to victory with hope and dignity. All right. And just when you thought, okay, I just got to do one song and then she's going to leave us alone. Oh, no. Groups like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, otherwise known as SNCC, wrote adaptations for mass meetings, marches, and other gatherings. Professional singers such as Mahalia Jackson and Marian Anderson showed their support in the performance and recording of spirituals and other freedom songs. They began using spirituals because they were familiar to protesters, even those from outside the South, and spirituals had served so well the need for strength gathering from the whole. This has been ever since it existed, and they really felt like these songs would be effective as far as sharing the struggles of the protest and keeping people together. Like the spirituals of old, the words were changed on the spot to reflect the mood or the situation of the movement. One change was from personal references, such as I or me, to group references, we or us, to further emphasize the sense of community. Songs were accompanied most often by clapping hands, tapping feet, or beating on whatever service was available at the time. So feel free to, when we're singing from here on out, if you want to go for it. Oops, we don't want to miss this song, though. Okay, so in this case, "Oh Freedom," the words we're going to be using here, but the song that we're actually going to sing is the melody that you're probably more familiar with as Amen, 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 Amen. Actually, I'm sorry, let me change that on this particular song. I actually do want to use "Oh Freedom." I don't know if you're familiar with this one. I will try to sing it so that you can have a sense of how the I'll start from the refrain, and then you can join me as you're picking up the melody. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more segregation, no more segregation, more segregation over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more dogs, no more dogs, no more dogs biting me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Protest songs could generally be described as either group participation or topical songs. Group participation songs, which included the call and response. So basically what we just did was call and response. I would sing a line or two, and then you follow it up with that same refrain over and over again. The call and response songs that featured a leader who introduced a line of text to which the group responded with a refrain was well suited to the large groups gathered for marches, sit-ins, or meetings. Topical songs were professionally composed songs written and performed by individuals as commentary or protest. Sing for Freedom, organized in Atlanta in May 1964, intent to bring freedom songs from different regions together. Songwriters and organizers from around the country attended to learn freedom songs from different protest areas for mass meetings, demonstrations, etc. Participants sang familiar folk songs with new verses added. There was this was a statement from one of the attendees. There was a tremendous impact that only occurred when 50 or 60 song leaders bring their voices and clapping together in thunderbolts of song for 20, 25 minutes, just on and on and on. The northern guests were out of breath, but they were not used to 20 minutes of letting your whole body explode into song. Yet, even here, using spirituals was not without its controversies. Some youth didn't share in the feeling that the old slave songs were appropriate for contemporary use, and some of their elders still felt the stigma that they felt was attached to those songs. You remember when I first started, I started with this song? This is most definitely call and response. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Okay, now that was the original text. This is what a changed version would look like. And since we just sang this part, let's jump down to deep down in the South. Deep down in the South, I'm gonna let it shine. Deep down in the South, I'm gonna let it shine. Deep down in the South, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. We have have a light of freedom. I'm gonna let it shine. We have a light of freedom. I'm gonna let it shine. We have a light of freedom. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Singer, scholar, and activist Bernice Johnson Reagan talked about the bus boycott meeting. She noted that the meeting closed with a traditional spiritual, sung without changing the words. She stated, "Here were two songs, both a part of the Black traditional sacred music repertoire. One song, Old Time Religion, was updated to articulate the immediate need for the movement. The second, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, ending the session, was sung in its traditional form. On many occasions, the new moved from the old in the midst of the movement activity. The evolutionary process was possible because the structure of the traditional material enabled it to function in contemporary settings. There was continuity with some traditional lyrics being changed for statements of the movement. These transformed songs were used in conjunction with older songs to convey the message that the struggle of blacks had a long history." The spiritual faded in prominence as the nature of the civil rights movement changed. Groups like SNCC embraced the Black Power movement philosophy, splintering members who had opposing views of the direction of the movement. The death of Martin Luther King in 1968 seemed not only to mark the decline of the movement, but to signal the return of the spiritual being sung as folk song to a century-long slumber in the archive of America's past. And if you've looked, you can probably guess what's going to be the next song. We Shall Overcome had its roots in the gospel hymns, I'll Be All Right and I'll Overcome Someday by Charles Tindley. Reagan traced its use as a protest song to the 1940s union protest activities against a tobacco production company in North Carolina. When SNCC formed in 1961, We Shall Overcome became their theme song, its most powerful means of expression. Author John Michael Spencer said, musically, the freedom songs were the paradigm of militancy. Blacks were not just singing about freedom, but were systematically seeking it. So, we're going to close the presentation, I think, with this song. And we're going to do basically what this call and response that we've been singing, all this, and I will try to call out the next line. So now, we've had all this practice I gave you in text. This time, this is actually what generally would happen in this type of a meeting, is that you would actually have someone standing and just leading the song, and they would give the next line of text. So, we're going to do just that. So I'm going to start it off and join in when you feel comfortable. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand today. Oh, hand in hand, someday we will live in peace. We will live in peace. We will live in peace. We will live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we will live in peace someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Yeah, the melodies would often be changed in subtle ways or sometimes in major ways. African songs, and you can also hear very clearly in spirituals, the focus is on the rhythm. So if it was necessary for them to reshape a word, adding extra syllables, taking syllables out, or whatever to make that, to keep that melody going, that rhythm going, they would do that. And so, if they heard a hymn that they, thought I could use that melody, but I might need to do a little something to it to give it a little extra help. And I think for me, this is why I sometimes have a challenge seeing spirituals in hymn books, because they have taken that thing and homogenized it and tried to fit it into the European, and folks are not always comfortable going away from the hymn book, and adding their own little something to it, to give it a little extra kick, an extra note or an extra slide or extra whatever. That's part of the Black church tradition. You might, I don't know if it's in this presentation or not, but you could often hear, even at a church where they're, say for example, I'm raised Lutheran. And we had the Lutheran, that old red hymnal was what I grew up on. But the hymns that we sang, if they, even something like Mighty Fortress is Our God is probably going to get a little help. I mean, I love that song, but it might have a little something extra added to it. Just, people just sang it. That's the way we sang it. But certainly when you're singing things like spirituals, or if somebody is singing gospel, which, curiously enough, is not actually my tradition. In fact, the presentation I'm giving the part of the concert tonight, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how sacred music is used in the church. And, those of us who splintered in the direction of the more traditional choices as far as Methodist, Lutheran, etc., tended to use the hymnals in that in those services in the liturgy. But gospel did not really come into our churches until well past the point that gospel music became very popular. It just didn't. They tended to be more conservative, and so gospel music just did not make it into those particular churches for a number of years past the point that it came into fruition. If you've been up since sunrise out in the cotton fields picking all day, do you think you would be smiling and singing either? No, I don't think I would be either. But no, some of that I think is Hollywood production, being a little creative with history. And a part of it, too, is that, there was a lot of acting going on to make the master think that everybody was happy with, their lives. And but, at night, at those secret camp meetings, you got to have a totally different perspective. One thing I should add, too, the slave owners learned very quickly that work songs, that the level of work that was done would go up dramatically if they allowed their slaves to sing, because then that rhythm, it was fascinating to watch. In Africa, they still do that quite a bit, where they use the songs and they're out hoeing, and it's just fascinating how quickly that work took place because they had that steady rhythm going. So they thought that it was a way of, first of all, of increasing the work productivity, and then secondly, hopefully keeping the slaves happy, and uninterested in running or whatever. And there were slaves, many of them, who were very happy to let them think that, that they were happy, and but oftentimes those songs had hidden meanings, and were communicating, I'm about to run, or let's gather for a camp meeting tonight. So they weren't, there was definitely multiple facets of things that were going on as those songs were being sung. And in fact, there's a lot of confusion, and I think this often happens with spirituals because they have gone into so many different areas, and not only as far as being sung in their traditional form, but from everything from, what I do as a concert performer to, unfortunately, being used as jingles for commercials. Conversely, we do the same thing. Amazing Grace. I can't tell you how many spiritual recordings I have seen where they've listed Amazing Grace as a spiritual. It is not. It's a hymn that can be sung as a spiritual. I can stand here right now and I can sing, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Or I can sing, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. And so yes, it ends up being treated in so many different ways, and it is a wonderful song. And the words are so touching. So it ends up being, it is definitely a favorite song in the African American community. I can tell you that from even in the Lutheran tradition, we will see that song at least a couple times a year. There are a number of different attempts, fortunately, that are still going on to try to gather folk songs because in this country we have so many different cultures that have come to this country who bring their own folk music or their own whatever musical traditions with them. There are a number of efforts throughout, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was some part of there are institutions I know that are specializing now. There's the Southern Life Music Center and that's not exactly right, but it's in South Carolina, that all they do is try to gather musical recordings and try to go out into the community and gather this music together. It's become a very strongly researched area. One of my projects is something that I'm calling Rare Gems. If you go in and look at, and this is one of the things I've discovered in my research, there are so many songs that are heard by different singers multiple times. And what I want to do is I want to create a recording. Maybe some of those songs would be used, but they would be different composer settings of them. But songs that are in the repertoire for singers, but have not been recorded. And that's a project I'm hoping I don't know if you've ever tried to finance a CD, but those things are really, really expensive to do. From everything that, that's involved in doing that type of a project. So, it's just been a little bit of fundraising time, but that is my next project, is to get that recording out there. I'm sorry, I just I forgot the nature of your question. I hope did I answer it, or did I sort of drift off into directions that you hadn't intended?
Well, there's nothing available now.
But I'm sorry. Yes, that was your original question. My CD from 2003. I've got some copies, but I'm not really selling it right now. You can find, you could, if you hunted for it desperately enough, but I think Amazon still has, I gave some to them to sell, but I really want to do my next sole production to be something more recent. Hopefully the database will eventually will be referenced at very least in the dissertation. But the project is that over the years, I've discovered as a singer, it is really hard to find recordings and know what recordings are out there of classically trained singers singing spirituals. So the project I'm working on is to go in and find these recordings. So far, I'm up to 3,600 entries. So that, just songs that you can find out who the performers are, what recordings they're performing on, what their voice types are, some general information about the pieces, and of course where to locate. I had tried where I can to find links where one could actually get their hands on the recording if they wanted. So, and it's just a very simple called the Spirituals Database, and it's a prelude to hopefully getting it published and then being able to use it as part of my dissertation research. Anything else? Well, I thank you all so very much. We are moving on to victory. We are moving on to victory. We are moving on to victory with hope and dignity. All right.